Well, welcome back, Mr. Wesley Schantz and Miss Sarah Miller, to Potter's Pockets or Packet or whatever, 007. This is our ultimate episode on the book of the Harry Potter series. So we will be finishing the first of what we hope to be mini chapters together now as the intrepid trio, very similar to Ron, Hermione, and Harry, except for one of us is not useless. Though I would say that that's a bit of a prejudice on my part from a friend of mine that I recall mentioning about Ron in the later series, but I don't think that he's particularly useless in the first book at all. I think he's very useful.
Not in this past reading. He's very useful.
Yeah, especially in that wizarding chess game. So I suppose what I'll have to keep my mind open to is whether Ron becomes less and less useful as his knowledge of the novel wizarding world becomes more and more shared knowledge between him, Hermione, and Harry. But I wonder about that. Well, y'all, it's great to be starting something and finishing something on the same day. And so we had chapters 16 and 17 today. I believe they were Through the Trap Door and The Man with Two Faces. So we got to see well, I guess sort of something we've been talking about is both the story itself, or the endeavor to get through the school in the curriculum of the school as the game itself, but also the metagame of learning. And this sort of strikes me, or at least chapter 16, as sort of a statement of that even though these students had their final exams, now they have to solve the riddles of each of their teachers in pursuit of the Philosopher's Stone. It's as if they now have to practically apply the magic or the learning that they've done during their time at Hogwarts. It's as if this is their real final exam. Yeah. Like the world is the real test of what you've learned. What did you all think about that?
Yeah, I like that as a reading, and I think the way that the school is set up, it's a way. I mean, ideally, it's a way of kind of encompassing that's the school would somehow do that. And so, in some sense, the world is not only the test but also the teacher. And as far as this book gives us a clear picture of like what Dumbledore's up to there at the very end. Like a few things are revealed about him that we weren't sure about before. I think your comparisons of him to God are, if anything, supported by that, right? So Hogwarts is the world and Dumbledore is God. Yeah, seems right.
But they have like practical portions of their exams, but even those don't seem like sufficient tests of their knowledge, or maybe they're tests of what they learned inside the classroom, but not something they learned at the school, but outside the classroom. Because they have to turn like a matchbox into a mouse, or a mouse into a matchbox, or something like that. But that's not real. I mean, that's like word problems in math when we were growing up. Like, oh, it's kind of an application, but it's not actually an application.
It's like being put into a safer, sterile environment, like for a scientific study. Like on the one hand, yes, this is an experiment about the nature of a creature, but on the other hand, these conditions are not the sorts of conditions that you'll find yourself in.
Right. But
for example,
I thought it was interesting too how like something that we've been wondering at for a while. There were parts of this reading that I didn't quite remember, which is a great gift, right? But where even Harry gets to the point where he thinks that Dumbledore taught him just enough to help, and Hermione and Ron are kind of like, that'd be terrible you could have been killed, and he's like, well, it's almost and then Harry says like, it's almost like he thought I had the right to face Voldemort. Like that. Like is it possible that obviously I think education is a right, but what you make of it is a choice, and that like, is risk a right? Is danger, or the opportunity to endanger oneself, is that something that we have a right to? I don't know.
Well, and I have a couple of responses to that. On the one hand, it seems that the point being made about risk and safety is you cannot avoid risk. There are certain risks that you can avoid, but risk or danger will enter into your life. And like I was texting you all before, the school motto of Hogwarts is Draco Dormiens Numquam Titilandum, which I was criticizing the normal ways of translating that, but which means a sleeping snake never, or one is never to stir up a sleeping snake. And so the idea is being that you don't need to add to the additional problems that you have, that problems will show up, and that part of what teaching is preparing you to deal with them without causing them yourselves necessarily. But the second point on that is the fact that Dumbledore is not present during the final test of Harry. He's gone off to London, and he shows up only in the last moment. And rather than appearing as Silver when he's finally presented to Harry in the last chapter, after his fight with Voldemort, he appears as gold, like the snitch at first. Like the thing that Harry has been searching for all along as a seeker. But something about that is, it reminded me very much of the Divine Comedy. When Dante he's learning alongside Virgil the entire time. So it's like he's Harry and Virgil is Dumbledore. And so Virgil is teaching him and helping him along. But at the top of the mountain of purgatory, in order to pass on to heaven, one has to have mastered the sort of liberal arts, or mastered one's will, so that one can move forward in the world by oneself, so that one can be one's own master, so that one can be complete. And in that moment, at the top of purgatory, Virgil disappears and Dante continues forward. And that sort of reminds me of what the path of the hero might be, that Dumbledore set the path. He has himself defeated a great wizard in 1945, who we'll soon see, played by Johnny Depp, Grindelwald. And now it's time for Harry to step up to the plate. And if anybody's going to do any saving, they're not going to wait for Godot. They're going to have to do it themselves based on what they've learned. Ultimately showing that what you have to rely on in the world, or at least in these moments of peril, is less somebody else coming and saving you, and far more you using that which you have at your disposal in order to save yourself and those around you. It seems more active than passive in terms of learning. Application. And just one last thing to add to that is, I think the situation that each of the students find themselves in during these challenges, like they'll get killed by these chess pieces, they'll get strangled by this terrible vine, they'll get attacked by this giant dog, or these keys. They're put in totally different situations from what they would be put in for their final exams. Rather than feeling safe, they feel under pressure, in danger, fighting against time. It's as if these tests, what they get right that a normal test doesn't, is that it puts them in the conditions, or under the same conditions they'll be in life when they have to perform these exact same actions. What were you saying, Wes? I'm sorry.
I was just making sure that I've got some things put away here. Sorry. No, I agree. Like the whole theme of like the school becoming real is pretty dramatic here. But the point that Sarah made a minute ago too about like the gift of forgetfulness, right? Like to be able to reread this, find something new. That struck me as being akin to this sort of negative gift of risk, or of actual danger, of something being at stake. And I thought that was really interesting, because I had the same experience where I think this part of the story, and it's true of each of the ends of the books, I remember the end of the book a lot less because I read it really fast, probably, trying to see what would happen. And so I read it a lot less carefully. And so I think it's interesting that on the one hand, they are like doing a lot of stuff here, but that goes hand in hand with all of the like learning and experience that they've accrued over the course of the year. So those two things seem to kind of cooperate in a way.
Yeah. Well, do you guys want to talk about some of the challenges then? Like starting with Fluffy and what it is that we needed to know about Hagrid and what we needed to know in order to defeat this giant three-headed Cerberus dog.
Well, I think if we're going to go like in chronological order, which we absolutely don't have to, but Neville represents an interesting challenge before Fluffy, right? We can talk about like the actual challenges and then circle back and talk about Neville.
No, but let's start with Neville. Let's start there. Yeah, what did you see there? I think that's very interesting.
I mean,
and of course we do always start our conversations with Neville.
I know. What's gonna happen when Neville features so much? He features a little less prominently in other books, but no, I think we start to see a pattern with that I know is repeated in future stories where Harry thinks, oh, I'm just going to go it alone. And they're like, you're crazy. You were coming with you. But it struck me as funny because a couple things like that we come to learn about Neville later, like, man, he would have been really useful in that first trial, right? Like in the trial with the with the devil's snare. There were 5 trials, but including the mirror, but there were 4 before the mirror. And it's interesting to me that he continually gets left out. I wonder, maybe if that's just, 3 is a easier number to work with for the writer than 4 or what. But I also thought like his courage in standing up to his friends. I mean, maybe I'm only thinking about it in terms of the way Dumbledore phrases it at the end, but it really is quite a big deal for him because this is a kid. He's never going to be friends with Malfoy. So standing up to Malfoy, what is he? I mean, he's risking bodily safety, but he's not risking emotional safety or comfort. I mean, here he is with the only 3 people who've shown him any kindness all year, and he's saying something that they don't want to hear. And like, I think that is emotionally brave, in a way that I think really gets overlooked. So
I agree completely, just because there's this beautiful statue of St. George at a church near where I'm staying here in Nashville, where St. George is fighting a snake that's twirled around his legs. And that gets, I think, the symbolism of St. George very well, that in order to combat the evil in the world, the snake representing evil, obviously, you have to combat it in yourself. Mm-hmm. And so I think about Neville here and the fact that he gets awarded the points that actually end up getting the House Cup to Gryffindor. And what he does is he stands up to his friends. It's like he stands up to himself. He shows that there is something they are doing which is potentially a very not Gryffindor thing, which is a thing that could hurt those around them. He doesn't, of course, understand that they're fighting a deeper game at this point, but based on the information he has, he's completely right, like you said. And standing up against an enemy, that's one thing, but standing up against a friend, like you said, it's as if you have far more to lose because you have a friend to lose. And especially with Neville, who doesn't have a lot of friends at this time.
Right.
I think also how he's dealt with sort of shows that he's in the moral right. I mean, Hermione, for one, it's Hermione, and I think it's important that it's her and not Ron or Harry that casts a spell on him. I think there would be sort of a dominance element if that sort of thing happened. But the fact that Hermione does, and it's Petrificus Totalis, it's a petrifying, like a Medusa move that comes from the feminine, which is so interesting to me. I haven't fully parsed that out, but I thought that was good. Also, just with Draco, he seems to have the negative trinity to Harry's, right? He has 3, Harry has 3, but his 3 are undifferentiated. Crabbe and Goyle, what's the difference between them? No, like we can't even tell, right?
Apparently, one of them is quite stupid. Like he's like, they all kind of hoped that he would fail out of Hogwarts, like as if that's a possibility. So that might be the only difference.
Yeah. And so one other, and they're very easy to replace, right? Which we'll see in the second book. But so Neville kind of shows that he's irreplaceable because of what he has in him, this sort of moral standpoint, not his competency in terms of magic, not his intelligence, not his strength, but his strength of character, which is something we'll see that he seems to have inherited from his parents. But I want to ask one weird question because I just remembered to ask this. Peeves, I found this out. Do you know why he's not in the movies?
No.
So here's the reason. This is the actual reason, which you can look up. The guy who played Peeves was so funny in the first movie that the kids playing Harry, Ron, and Hermione could not keep it together on screen with him. They couldn't stop laughing. He was so he was actually too good to be in the movies, which is an incredible idea. Peeves was too good to be in the movies. But I really wanted to ask, just adding challenges to the major challenges, because I think there's a good way of looking at it, is when Peeves catches the three out underneath the invisibility cloak and is like, ooh, I should call somebody like Filch. And then Harry does the voice of the Bloody Baron and tricks Peeves. I was wondering if y'all saw some significance in that moment. His ability, after seeing evil in the woods, to perhaps embody evil to some extent, or to have integrated some of his own dark side, so that now he has a stronger, he's more competent in the face of darkness in the world or something like that. Now he has some inkling into the darkness in the world and in himself. And that gives him access to an authority he didn't have before.
What do you think, Wes? I have an idea, I just have a thought, but what are your thoughts?
Go for it.
I mean, a couple things. In this case, and in a couple other moments in these last two chapters, Harry's instinct is on point. It's an idea that comes out of nowhere. Suddenly, he had an idea out of nowhere.
Yeah. Great wizard, Harry. Hermione says to him.
And but even like before they go to ask Hagrid if he gave away any information about how to get around Fluffy, it's like he has the light bulb moment when they were talking in the common room. Then he has this moment of Harry had a sudden idea, and it happens a few times that his instinct guides him, and it guides him with the mirror. He's very quick on his feet, and I don't know if that's because of the Forbidden Forest episode, or if it's just something that he's naturally has a proclivity for. That
I think, I agree that that's definitely part of his character. You're right to bring that up. It's not as if he just manifested the ability to work fast on his feet. But I was wondering if that specific way of dealing with it, because Peeves has been difficult for him.
I think the other thing that might that relates to this at the very least, or it might give us a way of seeing Harry as maybe like integrating like the nobility of his position as a hero with also some of the skills that make a villain, right? Which is deception.
Yes. You have to integrate your own darkness.
But like, so when they're on the wizard's board or the chess board, Ron is a knight. He's what he thinks he wants to be to distinguish himself from his siblings. Hermione is a rook, and
she's stability and tradition.
She goes forward and side to side, and Harry's the bishop, and like the bishop gets to move diagonally in a way that nothing else can move except for the queen, and I think that's significant because it feels like you're breaking a bit of a chess rule, and when you move like that, the bishop is like a very tricksy, highly effective piece on the board. It's also, I mean, at least the little chess that I know, it's one of the first things that you move.
Yes.
And I think like maybe that's a clue that he, like his ability to move diagonally, his ability to fly, he uses his instinct to like, I don't know. He uses his instinct to kind of become the leader of the three of them, like in a way that is pretty significant, of a growth for him. You know, I think that's an important development for him. That like, So that was just. I don't know enough about like the psychology or psychological stuff about, you know, is he like mastering some darkness within to become an effective hero. But I mean that sounds great, and you know. Sure.
Well, we can keep exploring that too. I mean, the basic idea the Jungians have is that there's this thing called the shadow that you project onto the world before you integrate it into yourself. And so you assume you're perfect when you're young and everything else in the world is imperfect. And so slowly over time, you have to understand that the imperfections in the world that you see are likely not objective parts of the world, but rather subjective parts of your own personality, which you
Right.
then have to fix.
I
And
mean,
so that's sort of the idea I'm sort of flirting with.
That's the Wizard of Earthsea right there in a nutshell. Like the Ursula Le Guin novel. But
so I want to ask about chess. I know that you're a chess player like I am, Wes. I know I'm not very good, but it's sort of a mechanical game too. It takes a lot of just rigorous time to play and study in order to get to a certain level. And then I'm told that among the masters and grandmasters, there's a certain ability that sort of manifests that not everybody has. But why do you think it is that none of the characters, and I have an idea on this, so this is sort of a leading question. Why do you think none of the characters choose to be the queen, the most powerful figure on the board? And obviously the most useful and I don't know. Why do you think a bishop, a knight, and a rook?
Yeah, I hadn't thought about the significance of which pieces they are too much. Initially I was just impressed that they figured out like what was going on.
Yeah, like agreed.
It's like, okay, so there's all this stuff now, like that they can kind of jump into it right away and do this. But then thinking about it a little further, like, so that means that Dumbledore just like blitzed through all of those rooms that quickly.
Yes.
There. So that's like another indication of like, okay, there's a certain like impressiveness about the kids figuring out all this stuff, but then there's another kind of impressiveness about the genius that is Dumbledore, right? Like,
and didn't even need to wait for the owl to get the message. And speaking of the intuition that sort of Sarah is mentioning there, like he just gets to London and realizes that's not the place to be.
Yeah. So like, I guess that's part of what I'm trying to say there is like they are operating on a high level for themselves, but they're not at the level of the queen, which has like omnipresence on the board, so it made sense to me that they would choose pieces which are powerful in their particular ways, and yet they're not at the level of the queen who moves anywhere at will. So
I think that's great. I was wondering also whether it showed the specific differentiation of each of them and none of them emerging as a clear leader, that each of them plays their unique part and can offer their unique contributions to the team, but none of them places themselves above the others. That in chess, you can assign a point value to each of the pieces, the rook being higher than both the bishop and the knight, making the bishop and the knight more expendable than the rook, which is interesting because Hermione, of course, is the girl and is the most competent, though she tells Harry that he's a great wizard. Actually, I want to ask about that very quickly. So Hermione's brilliant. She figures out that the devil snare is devil snare, and Ron idiotically says, well, I'm glad you figured out the name. That doesn't help at all, and that's ridiculous because the second you figure out the problem you're dealing with, now you can help to solve it. In fact, that in mental disease, once you figure out that you have a condition, it often relieves some stress and anxiety from people because now they know that there's something that can be done. Nothing wrong. And so what I'm wondering about is, I'm sorry, I'm losing my thought talking about mental disease for some reason. What these, go on. Yeah, Wes?
The great wizard comment that Hermione makes.
So there has been this contrast between Hermione and Harry this entire time, and we've talked about it some. There's some things that Harry does naturally, and Sarah started to bring this up earlier. The broom, he's a natural. It goes right into his hand, and then he can fly immediately. And then he's actually a great seeker too. He wins 2 games in his freshman year against the other houses. And then down here, he just knows intuitively what to do. But Hermione she receives the best marks and is the best student within the structure of the school. Why is it that what is it that she sees in Harry that makes him a great wizard that she feels like she lacks, even though she seems to have the most of anybody? Like, I wonder if it is that she, I don't really know how to put it, that there's this movie by the Porco Rosso, by Hayao Miyazaki that Wes and I got to talk about. And there's a scene in there where Porco is getting a new he's having his plane renovated, and he's having a girl engineer for the first time fix it, and he's sort of misogynist about this, and so he decides to test her, and he says, well, what do you think makes a good pilot? Practice? And she says, no, instinct. And she told him a story about himself, that the first time he ever flew, he was a natural. And so I was wondering whether there's supposed to be some sort of distinction here between people who are sort of naturals at things and people who just who excel.
I mean, Hermione is a natural at the content as well. Like, she does it once, and she there's, I don't know, when she says that books and cleverness, there are more important things, friendship and bravery, and I think that's a direct quote in the movie too. But it seems that Hermione is sort of really invited into the fold because of something Harry and Ron do, and they invite her in to be their friend, and maybe he has a knack for maybe the thing that he's a natural at that she's not is the relational stuff.
That's interesting. I thought that's right, that he has the right head on his shoulders, that his values seem to be straight.
And which is funny again, because it's like doubly a natural instinct for him, because he wasn't raised in a home that would teach him any of these things. So I think it's he from the minute he meets Hagrid, he doesn't shy away from this half beast. He doesn't shy away from a redheaded boy wearing hand-me-down clothes. He doesn't shy away from standing up for Neville. Like, I don't know, there's something that he does that the two of them as his proto sidekicks, that's not Hermione's natural gift. It's standing out from the crowd because of her brain. And Ron's natural disposition is to try and blend in, and I think Harry doesn't really have either of those.
Well, he naturally stands out too, right? He has an actual lightning bolt on his face.
He stands out, but I think he also every time we've seen him meet somebody new, he's, with I guess the exception of Draco, he's done so without judgment, and now he then judges them, I think, sometimes pretty soon, but that's, I think, one of the things that he's instinctually good at, though the other side of that is that he's clearly not good at instinctively knowing where the threat is, right?
Yes. That's exactly what I was just thinking about, because again, just to move to 17 to include that, when he's talking to Quirrell, he's so nonplussed about the fact that it's Quirrell and not Snape. And Quirrell sort of talks down to him, now not stuttering at all, showing himself for who he truly is, taking the persona or the mask off himself, and also the turban. And he says, Snape, Severus, no, he was trying to save you the whole time. And that's, oh man, what a revelation that was. He was speaking so that he could say a counter curse, and then and then it's obvious. Quirrell's almost like, look at the logic of this. It's simple. Why would Snape want to be the ref at your next game? Obviously, to save you, because Snape is that says two things to me. Why would it be the case that Snape would be uttering the counter curse and then would be chosen to be the official of the next game rather than McGonagall or anybody else? It seems to suggest that because he seems to be the most competent wizard on the staff to deal with potential dark arts threats against the students. And so it's as if, rather than being the ultimate evil thing that's trying to destroy Harry the entire time, though he obviously does very much dislike Harry because of his father and his similarity to him, he's actually been saving Harry the whole time. He's actually been protecting Harry. And like you said, Harry's totally misplaced where he thinks the evil in the world comes from, and totally does not expect it to come from Quirrell, just as we don't either, because, bumbling Quirrell, who's sort of a joke, how could evil come from him? So I guess I kind of sort of wonder about that. Why is Quirrell represented as so bumbling and jokish, and and stuttering, just to make it more shocking when he's revealed actually to be a dark wizard, with some confidence.
Yeah, I like the way that he is made to be this figure of fun and sort of like the students don't respect him. I think is pretty effective as like a metaphor for the book as a whole, because it's in a sense it's marketed as a children's book, like most of these fantasies that have child protagonists would be, right? But then when you come to the end and you see, like in the last few chapters, all of this pretty heavy thematic material coming out, then it's like the book has tried to, it lured you in with the Bertie Bott's every flavor beans and whatnot, and it gave you the strong stench of garlic there. It's like there's something really heavy that it's trying to do, and you see this more and more as the series goes on. Like there's certain motifs and things that recur, but that pattern of the books, like I said, towards the end of each book, you get this really powerful, like, showdown, which is hard to read carefully because you just want to like read it and enjoy and carry away with it. So I think, there's something very interesting there that you can do with a book that's so unassuming, but then has something so powerful, it turns out.
I think it also speaks to the theme that we've already picked up on it much earlier, which is that appear like things are not as they appear in this world, and like that's true of this book. It's true of the kids. People who seem strong can be shown to be weak. People who seem
like Fluffy and Hagrid,
right, and people who seem
or sweet.
People who seem incapable are shown to be greatly capable of other things, like Neville, and people who seem plain might also be one of a kind. Like Harry is extraordinarily plain, right? But he's also one of a kind. Or and then I think the other thing it speaks to is I really do think that this particular book, but also Harry Potter in general, really plays upon like some like this idea that like that there's like true evil is in deception. Like that's one of the places, or like I guess it lies in a lot of places in this story, but there's something about Quirrell that like it's such a lie, and it's like a really good lie because he keeps it up the whole time. But that there's something about his deception. Pair that or like strike that against Dumbledore's promise that the truth is both beautiful and terrible, and should therefore be treated with great caution. I shall answer your questions unless I have a very good reason not to, in which case you'll forgive me. I shall not, of course, lie. I mean, and that's something that we'll see in the next book, that like, the great evil is also, it begins in a deceptive move. It begins in like a,
a lie.
It begins in a lie.
And just to add again, Dante, to help that, what comes out in Dante's Inferno, because many of my students, when we're teaching the Inferno, when we get down to Satan, he doesn't speak. And many of them have been expecting a speech the entire time. And then I blow their minds by saying, oh, Satan's not speaking? Well, haven't you understood that his language is the language of lies? And that all those who are unrepentant and have spoken down in hell use his voice? So that the only voice you've heard while we've been in hell has been Satan's? Just as I explained to them then in Paradiso, the language of the divine, at least by Dante's account, is the language of truth.
Right.
And so that's the voice of the divine.
But it's also,
and that can come through in human.
And even before you meet Satan, like the 10 classes of falsifiers and the 4 classes of the treacherous, my students are always, we always start out with, what do you think are the worst things that human beings can do? And their ideas are almost always initially violent. And those are the most obvious. I talk with them all the time because the subtler, the more serpentine, more cerebral vices are they're more, I teach like some very dark Jedi like students who are like, I say, well, the reason why
the falsification or those who are traitors or the fraudulent are so bad is because those are rational skills.
Yeah.
And in order to develop rational skills, what must have happened in your past? You must have had a teacher that helped to teach you those rational skills. Well, there's a good faith understanding that when a teacher teaches you a skill, that you'll use it for evil or for good, especially if you're publicly educated these days.
Right. Well, but
yeah.
like, it's the things of deception that most erode, like the very fabrics of our civic communities, be they schools,
yes,
or friend groups, or whatever community you consider yourself a part of. And I think that maybe that's helping me figure out what Harry is good at. I think one of the things that Harry is good at is finding and understanding and maybe like even lifting up the skills of another in concert with his. So like maybe that's part of why he's such a great seeker at such a young age. When they're in the room with the broomsticks and the keys that are transfigured, and it's Hermione who helps them, each of them give a clue. Like Ron looks at the lock and says, this is what the key needs to look like, and then she says, it'll already be used because somebody's gotten through already.
Yes.
And then he's the one who flies and gets it, but he uses the other two to help him like pin it down. And I think
Ron hits the ceiling.
Right. So I think what Harry's really good at is like strengthening the fabric of a diverse community. And that includes honoring Neville and what he can do for them, and standing up for him at various moments. But it's deception. It's deceptive crimes like corruption or theft or dishonesty or false witness, all of these things in Dante, in that eighth circle, that like really erode this a diverse, vibrant, flourishing community, or a flourishing economy, or a flourishing justice system. And Harry, I think, is really good at, like, even for someone like Hagrid, who like has clearly made mistakes, he doesn't he doesn't expel him. I think Dumbledore is similar, treating somebody's strengths as a way for the entire community to benefit and grow, as opposed to trying to make everything homogenous and you have to be just like me. Because I do think that that's maybe the difference between Hermione and Harry, is that Hermione's excellence is measured on one scale, whereas like the academic scale, whereas I think maybe Harry has a bigger picture. Certainly Dumbledore does, of what makes somebody good.
And maybe they represent the logos too in that respect, and that what he does is he honors his own truth, that he's honest with himself, that he acts honestly, and he seems to be able to seize the moment in a way that other people can't.
Harry,
he puts it all together, in a moment that others can't, and that's the difference between, like, say, an individualistic society or like a free democratic society where everybody can be their own persons, rather than, like, say, a totalitarian society where everybody has to be the same and pure-blooded. But I really like the point you made about deception, because if I look back at Quirrell, much of what his character is around and much of the negative effect he has seems to be as a result of deception, right? Mm-hmm. He's let both a troll in and a bigger troll in. They could have hurt students. That's a product of his deception. He's a joke, and his class isn't taken seriously. That's a deception. He even his smell is even a deception. He smells like garlic, and the Weasley twins make fun of him and say that's because they're vampires coming after him. Even his, it's like what Harry represents that Quirrell doesn't, is that where evil starts is in the mind of the young people, and then the thought develops alongside the character of a person. And so we'll see this in Tom Riddle and Voldemort soon enough, and we'll also see that something about Voldemort is that he often needs a boy in order to return to form. So not only does he need to attack Harry here, but in order to get his body back, he will need to use Harry's body and blood, almost suggesting that what Voldemort is sort of a principle of evil that finds itself embodied in a human. And how that human manifests him, at least initially, is through deception and through lies.
I also thought, like, that idea of of evil as, like, when Quirrell, like, unwraps his turban, and it's so creepy, the whole concept of this is like a little trippy, but there's a head in the back of Quirrell's head.
Can only repeat itself too. I really like that. I didn't notice that when I was younger.
And
that it speaks in repetitions.
Yeah, he's mirror, shadow, and vapor. I have form only when I share another's body.
Mirror, repetition, love it.
And it's like that evil is this parasitic thing.
Yes.
And it reminded me a lot of like the idea that evil is like the absence of something, and the absence of being, right? It seems like extraordinarily at least related to those kind of classical concepts of evil. And then when he comes back and he says there is no such thing as good and evil, there is only power. Like that's
right, just like Ollivander, just like the Sorting Hat.
There's like that's such a modern conception of good and evil.
Well, it's sort of an amoral conception. I think on one plane it seems to be correct. It's like that's true that good and evil do seem to be subdivisions of that which is competency or power, but that doesn't mean that power is the more important feature of human existence. Mm-hmm. It's almost like that's what the sort of Tower of Babel idea is supposed to be. It's like, yes, well, the thing about just acquiring too much power, and I was talking about Wes with this the other day, is that it tends, if one becomes, it doesn't matter how powerful one person becomes, because if in pursuing power they decide to fight against someone else, say it's Voldemort fighting against the magical folk in this world, that which is simply powerful by itself will inevitably be defeated by people within the same system who are good, because there will be more of them at some point. And it's almost as if why we exist is not to acquire more and more power, because what do you do with it once you have it, but in order to maintain a certain code, and that we need the power necessary in order to maintain that which is good or stable, that we need that which is necessary, not just, we don't need power just for its own sake. And to pursue it for its own sake tends towards evil, because eventually you will no longer live according to the moral code of good and evil, because in the pursuit of power, you will realize that evil things will help you to become more powerful in the short term, like killing people or seducing their minds or killing unicorns. Wes, I'm sorry, I started speaking where I knew I jumped in when I think you should have been speaking.
No worries. No, I've just kind of been like flipping through these last few pages of this great, struggle, and kind of admiring how skillfully the story is told at this part. And I find like I said, all these parts at the climactic moments, they're so compelling in each book. But the way that we get a kind of like mirror between Harry facing Voldemort, and then after that Harry facing Dumbledore, I found really, really interesting, and wanted to kind of look at some of the stuff that is echoed between those two parts there. So like, well, the first thing, right, is like the stone, the Philosopher's Stone, the Sorcerer's Stone, which has been this thing that they've been trying so hard to protect or to get or whatever. Voldemort still considers it like essential, right? Mm-hmm. But even he seems to recognize that taking Harry out might actually trump that. So there's that. And then Dumbledore so lightly like mentions, oh, the stone was destroyed, So it's like this incredibly powerful, important thing. Oh yeah, what about it? We got rid of it. Yeah, forget that. What's important, Harry, is like the truth, right? And like love and all this stuff. Yes. So again, I found that to be like a very effective way of kind of making the story like compelling, right? You get this like action-packed, suspenseful moment, and then you get this like calm, like telling the background of stuff moment. And they're juxtaposed.
Reflective, like his half moon silver spectacles. Just like you mentioned, another parallelism is when we first see Voldemort, I believe how he's described as chalk white, slits for nose like a snake. So he looks like a snake embodied in the head of Quirrell. Okay. the first visage we then get of Dumbledore when we're waking back up, when Harry wakes up, is of something golden, like a snitch. And so it's like he's the golden sun, whereas Voldemort is like the snake, which I think supports our reading that Voldemort is sort of like a figure of evil or Luciferian in some respect, whereas Dumbledore is sort of like a god or good overarching figure too. He also explains, like you were saying, Wes, whereas Voldemort is trying to get something out of Harry. He's trying to get him to act in a certain way. He's trying to get him to produce the Philosopher's Stone or the Sorcerer's Stone so that he can then use it for evil. It's as if Voldemort is representing what evil does to a human. You can do these great things in the service of me, but it's not in the service of you or your community. And that seems to be the problem or the twist with it. Whereas what actually gets Harry the Philosopher's Stone is the fact that he just wants it before Voldemort can get it. He doesn't want it to use it. And that's what gets it. He wants it to deny it to evil. He wants to safeguard it. He wants to be a custodian of it. He doesn't want to identify with it in the same way that Voldemort wants it. It's almost as if there's a humility there that Voldemort doesn't have that keeps Harry on the path of the hero and also from becoming subject to evil. That rather than having the ultimate power that will then make him immortal and give him infinite wealth, well, he actually gets the ultimate experience of life, which is to be a hero. It's almost as if the idea is it's not what you get in life, but the experiences or the choices that you make during the problems or the obstacles of your life, which determine whether your life is good or bad, rather than like just the material resources that you have access to, like Draco Malfoy, I believe, or some spoiled little child like Dudley.
I like that Dumbledore points out that that's like his proudest moment was the trick with the mirror. So it's funny that it's humility that solves the problem, but it's like that's one thing that Dumbledore is sort of proud of. Like he can't help himself.
Well, you know, it's sort of like being proud of your students too, right? As a teacher or as an authority figure. That doesn't seem to be like a hubristic pride so much as they seem to have gotten the lesson that you had to teach them, and now they can embody the quality that you have as well. And there's now a similar. It's as if you have passed on to them through them making the right choice what it is that you had by yourself making the right choice further back in time or farther back in time. What else did you notice, Wes? I'm interested. This is very interesting. About Dumbledore and
I thought we should probably talk about the way that a couple of things. Sorry, the way that Harry actually does lie. There, he's like, I have to lie.
Yes, he lies.
Yeah, I thought that was interesting. But then the thing that he lies about does come true later, so it's not really a lie. You know, he says, "Oh, you know, I'm winning the House Cup for Gryffindor, and I'm shaking Dumbledore's hand."
Oh, that's funny.
So
yeah,
he fully intends to lie, but it's for such a true reason that it's as if the only thing he can say like is in some sense true. That I found interesting. And then I think, well, like the way that they sort of explain but don't fully explain what's going on between Harry and Voldemort. This
with the burning.
This concept, yeah, right, exactly. That's something that has to remain secret for now, right? So there is a limitation again to how much of the truth you can say there. But
it's interesting because it's almost like Harry can grasp Dumbledore, but Voldemort, but Voldemort cannot grasp him. And something I should have said a lot earlier is even, and I think I said this in an earlier podcast, or one of us did, even Voldemort's name obscures him, right? He who must not be named. Even his name is a lie. And even his name literally is a lie. We will soon find out, right? I am Tom Marvolo. It's an anagram.
It's a
reshaping.
Fake name.
It is a arbitrary or subjective restructuring of his essence, which is effectively what he attempts to do, right? Through dispersing himself through Horcruxes. And it's like he tries to go against nature to transcend nature, but he will ultimately fail to do this.
I think another thing that like that the two of them are, I don't know, parallel might be the wrong word, but like a reflection of one another, is that Voldemort wants this stone to give him body, and he's willing to, he admits to taking the life of the unicorn,
And
such
anything
that he
else.
might have, such that he might have life or stave off death or something like
Opposite
that.
of sacrifice.
Whereas Dumbledore says, to the well-organized mind,
Yes.
death is but the next great adventure. So like, and again, this is foreshadowing what we learn about him later, especially with the Horcruxes, but that one of them is not afraid to die and one of them is deeply afraid to die.
That's right.
And it's like a power that one of them, like the power over life and death, is something that one of them pursues, both for himself and the world around him. And one of them acknowledges that that's a power not proper to me. And is therefore, oddly more powerful, like,
yes.
like a recognition of one's own, and
organization.
I think that's part of what's so interesting about Harry, is that like he doesn't, like, he knew that he wasn't going to be able to stave off whatever was happening in that final room for too long. So he sent Hermione and Ron to go get Dumbledore, because he knew, like, I'm a first year and I'm going to get there, but I'm not going to be able to survive for very long. But he doesn't understand what saved him. And I love that, like, I think what it does is it makes vulnerability and like human relationships the source of your resistance. That like the way that his mother loved him, the way that he grows to love other people, it becomes like the source of your power, even if it is the thing that like also leaves you most vulnerable. I'll be honest that like I was reading this right after the funeral on Wednesday, and I got to that passage and I just started crying again, where he describes why where Dumbledore's describing why Harry's skin burned Quirrell, because like in the homily at the funeral there was just this part of the homily where the priest was saying that, like, that there's free will means there's the power for love but also the power for pain, and like you don't get love without the possibility of it being taken from you, and yes. Like either you live in a world,
life too, liberty as well, happiness.
Yeah, either you live in the world, either God makes this world without free will, and then there's not suffering, but there's also not great amounts of love, or there's free will and there's the possibility for both.
Right, and the possibility of being a hero, because in order to be a hero, you have to put yourself in peril, which means the potential for sacrifice, which means death. And just something interesting based on what you said there is something Yoda says in the Star Wars Clone Wars series about the dark side, is that those of the dark side are cowards, because they're consumed with the material world, with wealth and power over others, whereas the light side, they sort of accept their death and their own limitations. So that it suggests that the dark side of both magic and the Force in these sort of fantasy or sci-fi universes is the capacity to pursue power beyond normal limitation at the expense, or for your own benefit at the expense of those around you and your greater society. And so what that delimits is your ability to acquire personal power. But what that utterly limits and destroys is your capacity to connect to others in the larger community, which seems to be the ultimate source of power, right? Because what is the ultimate source of human strength? Well, humans bonding together. I'm even reading a book by Jonathan Haidt right now, where he talks about group selection by evolution, and that we actually have a hormone and neurotransmitter called oxytocin, which helps us to bond with each other. And in bonding with each other by moving in similar ways, like marching together or doing similar physical activities or dancing together, we actually become stronger as a unitive group and therefore more capable of defeating other groups. So part of what
I was just going to say that's a perfect kind of like social psychology distillation of what, or like version of what saves him in the end in a way that he didn't even was that like a bond that is inexplicable to him, even not something he even remembers.
Yes.
And that I think that's absolutely central.
And
to
again,
this.
he's saved by someone who loves him rather than simply his own self, right? Like again, he finds himself waking up and having to be told what happened. And he's famous all over again for this. Which I thought that was just a funny parallelism.
That's where,
Wes, what?
That's where Dumbledore now became very interested in a bird out on the windowsill, which gave Harry time to dry his eyes on the sheet. So the narrator is sort of like Sarah mentioned, like cueing us, like, okay, so if you didn't already notice, like this is the part where it's okay to cry, like this is the right thing for you to do in this moment. And Dumbledore is busy looking at this bird. He, the fall of the sparrow kind of thing right here. So.
Oh my God, Wes! I wrote that in. I wrote that in the margin of my book. That's the Hamlet line. Like,
yeah.
If it be not now, yet it will come. And I always think of that line in. There's a line in the Iliad that's very similar. Like there will come a dawn or a sunset or a high noon or whatever, where I'm gonna die, and it's the thing that it's the thing that Achilles like doesn't want to happen for a while. And then what happens? I mean, like kind of to distill everything, like his best friend / cousin /
it's his best friend.
His best friend dies dressed like him.
And then he kills a guy dressed like him.
And then accepts his own bodily limitations after fighting a river of some kind. I mean, it is all kind of that's a metaphoric waiting of reading of but that recognition of what you can and can't do, and how the things that you can do are only made stronger by the other things that other people can do that you can't, but that you allow to join with the things that you can.
Right. If you only become stronger in a way that supports the system you're a part of, if that's a society or an army. But if you become so strong that you then start diverting the resources of the system to you, which then hurts the system, then you become actually, even though personally stronger, you become weaker because the system that supports you and protects you is weakening and thus is more subject to being destroyed. I think that's perfectly illustrated by the fact that the second that Achilles Achilles becomes selfish and refuses to add his power to the Achaeans, they start to get destroyed by the Trojans. The second you stop operating in a well-organized fashion, as Dumbledore said, and stop recognizing the necessary limitations of being a human and therefore a creature with some prescribed and predefined limitations, though you do not know them all, perhaps some of them that you think are real or not, it's almost as if what the light side or what Harry has that Voldemort doesn't have is a more sophisticated understanding of human nature, even though I would say it's not articulated in Harry yet. It's embodied, right? It's the decisions he makes. He just naturally makes the right ones. It's like he's willing to die. Voldemort will do anything necessary not to die. It's like, well,
I think that's, I was just going to say, that's the height of deception, is that you've deceived yourself into what is appropriate. Right?
That's right. Because if you're trying to stay forever, you, like Lucifer, must think that you are God. But the fact that you have to struggle in order to make yourself immortal is prima facie indication that your nature is not immortal, that you should not. You have to do everything necessary in order to continue on against nature. It's like, it's like Voldemort. You don't have a body anymore. Everybody hates you. People don't even say your name. You look like a snake. You don't even have a nose. It's like having a bunch of Horcruxes. It's like, how tremendous is your fear that you refuse to pass away, even though you're willing to live in such a limited, destroyed, decadent existence. It's like what being a hero is you get to live the height of life and then die, and you're spared what Voldemort has to go through: utter dissipation and loss of body and nature and moral fabric. It's like, I don't know. I'm just parsing that out right now. It's as if it's like a tree destroying the forest to be the best tree, I would say, is the analogy that comes into my head. It's like, I'm the tree of life because I've destroyed all the other trees.
I think maybe a part of that too is Harry does seem to like really, I don't know. I haven't totally thought this through, but aside from his love of the invisibility cloak and like the mischief that it allows him to cause, it does seem like he always, in this, particularly in this reading, he reminded me of like a detective. I don't know,
Harry,
who's like, yeah, Harry, like bent on figuring something out. Maybe because the other books I'm reading right now are all like noir detective fiction, because that's how I like pass the time in the summer. But he that interest in the truth, or like figuring something out, like the moment where he, God, I we've all had that feeling too, where you know that you've forgotten something but you can't remember what, or there's something that I've overlooked that I forgot to do, that I don't know, I think that that's a significant trait of his, that maybe that's part of what makes him different from the others, is a interest in pursuing truth. I don't know.
Yeah, and something about that is that it's not a straightforward battle for Harry. Even if we look at the house points that he's awarded, and this is something I took interest in this time, looking where he's awarded and not awarded points, and maybe y'all can correct me on this, but I believe he loses 2 points to Snape, gains 5 points by defeating the troll, loses 50 points for being out, and then gains 60 points at the end. And so if you do the math, 60 minus 50, that's 10, minus 2, that's 8, plus 5, that's 13. And so I was wondering whether, there are just a couple things about that. The person who seems to be the least lucky might be the most lucky, 13, of course, being, sort of an unlucky number, and we just had a Friday the 13th. But also because he's not invincible. He doesn't not mess up. He's not, he's constantly messing up. And in fact, Harry messes up the worst of any student on campus that year with his friends. And yet, he also does the greatest thing with pure nerve and courage, getting awarded 60 points. And so it's like, it's not a zero-sum game, but it's also like the battle versus good and evil. But it's also not a game where you win by a large margin either. He doesn't, for all he doesn't produce a giant, like he doesn't produce 100 points, right? For Gryffindor, that would be more like a Hermione sort of thing to do. He produces 13, but they're very useful, just like Neville's as well. And so he comes out positive, I guess is what I'm trying to say, but not by a lot.
Yeah, well, going back to the truth thing, I'm interested in how certain things are revealed, and I think Dumbledore in the last feast there, revealing the true winner, that's a good image of that. But certain things are concealed, or at least allowed to be unspoken for now. And the big one is why is Voldemort going after Harry Potter? And the second one here, I think the most interesting thing about the series, totally, is Snape, right? And so like he explains about how Harry's father and Snape had a relationship much like Harry and Mr. Malfoy, and that he did the thing that Snape could never forgive, which was save his life. And Harry's trying to understand, but it made his head pound, so he stopped. Right. So there's this limitation for Harry on that stumbling block of Malfoy, of Snape, of this person who by all means should be your friend, and yet you have this antipathy towards, which you cannot understand.
Well, and also, oh no, I'm sorry, Wes.
That's like, it's a thing that is at the heart of lots of great literature. Like it makes me think of Billy Budd, and it makes me think of Shakespeare plays.
Yeah.
And it's like there has to be this kind of black box about the hero and the villain, which you don't get to sort of articulate. It's there, and it's in the background of everything. But yeah.
No, I was just gonna say that's also Dumbledore only telling part of the story.
Yeah.
Like Dumbledore is I mean, the two things that he keeps from him are like the full truth about James Potter and Severus Snape as children, and the whole truth about Voldemort is going after him. And eventually those will become things that Harry either learns through the like occlumency lessons, or through a conversation with Dumbledore after an even greater and more dangerous encounter. And I guess are there certain things that are there certain truths that you can, like, you only should learn a certain way or at a certain point in your life? Like, it seemed as though maybe Dumbledore was saying, like, you're not old enough for that one yet.
Exactly.
Well, and also that, yeah, go on, Wes.
No, just like it's the difference between like seeing the Shakespeare play and like watching what happens with this thing, and then like listening to some buddy explain like their interpretation of what happened. So it's
Right.
the second,
Instead of just telling him what happened, he lets him embody this. He lets him do the action and then helps him reflect on what it meant and what he understood and what he did. I would say two things about it. For one, Dumbledore seems like a good educator, and that part of learning is that you learn in time and you learn only segments at a time of a larger truth, whether that be a particular lesson within a particular class or any class within your entire education. But also that what Harry seems to, or what Dumbledore helps Harry to see here, is the significance of his own actions. What he was doing intuitively, Dumbledore gives him a clearer picture of what the situation actually is and where he was right and where he was wrong. And something that Harry's going to have to do, which it seems like Voldemort was never able to, is to be corrigible, to be changeable, to be mutable. He has to change his perspective on Snape, who he has been projecting this idea of evil onto. And obviously he was totally wrong, right? It was skewed. There was a lot of evidence that seemed to indicate that this was Snape, but it turns out that it was misplaced the entire time, that nothing was actual evidence of Snape's evil, that it, because of the interpretive framework that Harry was using, based on the fact that when he first saw Snape, he felt some pain, and then Snape was pretty mean to him the first day he talked to him. He thinks he's evil, but he's totally misunderstood Snape. And just one thing about Snape and James's relationship is, I wonder if what James upset by saving Snape was that he upset the structure of Snape's consciousness, because if both of them were enemies, then in their own stories they were heroes. And then the person who they projected evil onto, or the shadow, was, if you were Snape, it was James, which he earned, which we'll see later in the series. Or if you were James, it was Snape, potentially. And so in James actually saving Snape, he shows that the thing which is evil is not himself, which Snape had been projecting onto, but actually that the evil that Snape hates in James is in himself. So it's like what James forced onto him through his sacrifice for Snape, who he hated, is that, well, actually the thing you hate, which you think is me, is really you, and that lesson is such a bitter and terrible lesson that Snape will never, he can never live it down, right?
And we know that, I mean, so I love that idea about Dumbledore being like the best teacher, and that there are some lessons that you have to learn a certain way, like like the idea of the difference between, say, reading a book about some law of physics and doing an experiment about that law, and like seeing it for yourself and participating in it and measuring it. And then a really important part of Ignatian pedagogy is the reflective piece. Like, well, what did I know? What did I do? What do I know now? What should I do next? And that, like, the process of like learning in the Ignatian style is that, and I'm only speaking about that because that's what I'm like coming from for the last 10 years, but is that you can't change everything the next time. You can only change one, maybe two things. So like it's this constant cycle. Yeah, these of as you said, like adjusting. And we know that like Harry's gonna have a really hard time dropping his suspicion of Snape. Like it's gonna happen multiple times. He's not the most mutable or corrigible young man. He's gonna continually bring up this animus towards this professor who's quite frankly kind of mean to him, but like it reveals Harry's immaturity at his inability to look past that, I think. But in this moment, it does seem like his unwillingness to tell the whole story about why Snape and his father hated each other, and his unwillingness I think that's maybe on Dumbledore's part, like an attempt to like let him have this memory of his father as a hero for a while before I complicate that for you. Because if you think about it, I mean, Harry's 11 in this moment, and 11 or 12. I mean, in the world of magic, in the world of Muggles, like they are not developmentally capable of understanding the like the complexities of the human character. I mean, it wasn't until I was like in my mid-20s that I understood that my parents were humans and not like that I had fundamental experiences of their flaws and their strengths, and like saw them as humans to whom I was an equal, not just as your parents, you know. And like I think that's like he's kind of protecting the memory of his father for a little bit longer, until Harry's ready to perhaps face another truth, and which it doesn't diminish the virtue of his father, but it also adds a more like complex dimension to the story. I think the same is true for the prophecy that Harry has to learn that through experience, right? Not through a lesson or a lecture or you know.
Well, the idea on learning seems to be shared in Harry Potter as well as in the Purgatorio by Dante. In the Purgatorio, what the spirits do is that they actually act and work and suffer during the day, much as we work during the day, diurnal as we are. And then at night, they're incapable of motion. They're immobile, so they have to move their minds. They reflect. And so every day they work, and then they adjust through reflection at night, and they slightly improve what they're doing for the next day. And they continue that process along as long as they have to. And that's just like how we learn, right? Make an experiment, and then you think about it and you're like, okay, well, what could I improve? Could I improve this tool? Could I apply this better? Could these proportions be better? Could I put this in at the different time? And then you try again. And again, it's not full sail, completely different, like you said, Sarah, but you might have a small backward step or a small forward step. And the idea seems to be, just to connect back to what we were originally asking about with Dumbledore and why he allows Harry to take risks, is that you have to, in order actually to learn, because you have to do the actual action and have the actual experience in order to have the theater of imagination, have the event present within it so that you can reflect on it and have the motive to reflect on it, because you're going to do that same thing tomorrow. So if, like, say you're a tennis player and you're serving all day and you're practicing your serve, and then you go home at night and you watch some videos and you think about, how could I improve my serve? Well, why are you thinking about improving your serve instead of anything else? Well, what are you doing tomorrow? You're going to go serve again. Well, why do you think about serving at night when you're not serving? Well, so that you can improve tomorrow, so that you're not just serving every day, you're improving yourself every day. You're learning every day. And that's part of what I think Dumbledore shows when he talks and fills in the story in small ways, that there are actions or moments, pivotal moments and things that Harry must do in his life first before he is capable of reflecting on the meaning of them. Almost suggesting to me that it's like, you got to go out and live your life and then reflect on it. You can't just sit in the books, as Hermione says. You can't just be clever and full of books. What do you think about that, Wes?
Gosh, yeah, I mean, it's fitting. I think that's a good place to kind of end this, this book here, because this is where Harry leaves off for the summer, right? I'm gonna have fun with Dudley this summer, right? So
he doesn't know they can't do magic.
Yes, exactly. One more a sin of omission there, not telling. But for a good end, yeah.
Well then, you two. So it seems we finished something and are beginning something new. Would you like? Should we just start with the Chamber of Secrets next time and keep going? Keep the magic going.
Good to me. I think we should try to move at a similar pace, although each book gets a little longer. I think we should just try to discuss them.
I'm having a little trouble hearing you, Wes. I can hear you, but only barely.
Just saying.
Oh, there you are.
Yeah, with each book getting longer than the last, I think we should try to keep going at a similar pace, but it might just mean that they get stretched out a bit more. So, yeah.
Yeah, and actually, something we talked about that I suggested that I shouldn't forget is, do we want to read that? I know we were supposed to read that article by was it C.S. Lewis or Tolkien? It was Tolkien on fantasy stories for next time. And maybe we could read like just the first couple of chapters of Chamber of Secrets and that as well, and mostly focus on that if we want to. I know y'all two have already read that, and I need to catch up with you two on my C.S. Lewis and that.
Yeah, sure. I think the first few books of the series, they really like a lot. There's a lot that's regurgitated in the first couple chapters of each of the first few books. Not like it's not like boring regurgitated, but like the world gets kind of repetitively created for you.
We come to know it a little better. It's known territory.
Yeah. And so, but you're being immersed in a similar fashion. So
like what you were saying, it's an iteration. It's not all new every time.
Right. Yes. So that's fine with me. Sure.
Yeah. All right. Well, you other two intrepid adventurers, perhaps we'll have to figure out next time what piece we would be on the chessboard. And I've just had the most wonderful time with all of you, and I can't wait to start something anew.
I'd be a pawn for sure.
Well, a pawn can become a queen, so very good. Yeah, I might say I'm a pawn under threat of being taken by a queen, 3 or 4 spaces away from the edge of the board. So there's great potential for catastrophe or for success. Who knows? How about you, Wes?
Yeah. I think as far as the chess players go, like I really like Ron's move there to just to sacrifice himself. I think that's the kind of thing that's like that makes chess interesting. Like you don't just get to like dominate your opponent, but you have to like do things that are a little bit interesting. To come out on top. So
it's not just you. Yeah, and that's actually the mark of a superficial or a young chess player, right? Try and take somebody else all their pieces. Try and take all their pieces. It's like that's too straightforward. It's too rookish an approach to chess. All right, y'all. Well, this is wonderful. I think we're getting better every time, and let's keep offering something great to those who listen.
All right.
Awesome.
Thanks.
All right, take it easy, fellas.
All right.
Bye.
Bye.
The podcast you just heard was published with Anchor. Got something you want to say to the creator of this show? Send them a voice message using the Anchor app, free for iOS and Android.